Hi, how are you? Welcome to this special program of Synthesis Global 2025. I'm Paola Perez, and today we're going to talk about migration. Migration, which also is part of the psychological war where disinformation becomes a weapon. Governments and elites in different countries of the planet use disinformation to generate fear, divide society, and dehumanize migrants. This is achieved by spreading key falsehoods to criminalize them. An offensive that seeks to impact the migrant, eroding their human, civil, and above all migratory rights. It must be said that the sanctions also become one of the direct and indirect reasons for the forced migration of thousands of Venezuelans, a fact that has been denounced by President Nicolas Maduro. This is what he sentenced. The fault of migration in Venezuela was taken by the sanctions against the economy. It must be said that the increase in Venezuelan migration in recent years cannot be analyzed without placing the magnifying glass on the psychological war. A manipulation of the global perception that seeks to justify these aggressive measures of that U.S. foreign policy. The migration crisis and psychological war is a strategy that seeks not only to destabilize the South American nation, but also to manipulate the global perception of Venezuelans migrants, criminalizing their condition to justify aggressive foreign policies. The concept of psychological war or cognitive war was identified by analysts as a central component of the hybrid war that has been implemented against Venezuela since at least 2013. This offensive has as its main objective to dispute the perception of reality, manipulating information to create narratives of chaos and despair in the population. In this war, information is manipulated, creating narratives with the aim of styling the collective imagination ideas, such as that Venezuela is a dictatorship or that it is a failed state. The psychological state that is sought to be generated is of fear, anger, as well as uncertainty, whisper, despair, with the aim of generating such instability that will make the country ungovernable. The migration crisis cannot be understood completely without considering the dimension of the psychological war. This strategy, which employs the manipulation of information, the criminalization of migrants, and the dehumanization of a people, represents a complex challenge for the international community, which must discern between geopolitical narratives and the human reality of millions of people who are only looking for a better future. The Great Humanitarian Mission Vuelta a la Patria from Venezuela is a program of the Venezuelan state that has allowed to repatriate its migrant population in condition of dignity. Since its creation, it has generated the reunification of hundreds of families. In February, two planes with Venezuelan migrants supported from the United States arrived in the country. On the first flight, 95 Venezuelans landed on board, while the second landed minutes later with the same number of migrants. They were all men. In the first half of 2025, 47 flights were completed, bringing more than 8,700 people. One of the most important was in July 18th, with the arrival of 252 Venezuelans kidnapped in El Salvador, which were taken to a concentration camp in El Salvador, where this boy 252 Venezuelan migrants were taken to a concentration camp. There were people of these demoniacs who came out to applaud and support that. And we came out. I came out as president to say that we rescued those boys. Earlier than later, we rescued them because those boys are innocent and we rescued them. And so it was 252 boys who returned to the country to work, to study, to their families. During the month of August, 7 flights of the repatriation program Grand Mission Vuelta a la Patria came from the United States with a total of 1,456 Venezuelans returning. All flights came from the United States, mainly from Texas, and some including a scale in Honduras. In the months of September, October, and November, around 24 flights from the United States arrived. More than 5,350 men, women, and children who were part of a large family reunion were repatriated. In December 2025, 5 flights from Mexico and the United States returned to the country. This occurs after the rescheduling of the flights that had been suspended by the United States government itself, and the number of repatriated this year is approximately more than 8,000 compatriots. Venezuela's authorities highlighted that the returns are added to the process of economic growth and productive development of the nation. The kidnapping of Venezuelan children by the United States authorities has also become a battle without trust for the Bolivarian government. The rescue of these minors, of these children, girls, and adolescents is also framed in international law, something that President Nicolás Maduro was not going to give up. The kidnapping of Venezuelan children is part of the deportations of the Trump administration against migrant families and their illegal imprisonment in penitentiary centers, which forces the separation of fathers and children, leaving children without defense housed in substitute homes and shelters. In the face of the actions of the United States, Venezuelan society has reacted with determination to demand the immediate release of the kidnapped minors. After negotiations and agreements, Caracas achieved the return of the children to Venezuela. The infos were received by President Nicolás Maduro, a leader who has shown his commitment to the defense of the citizens. Policies against the migrant population are one of Washington's actions to seek to impose the hegemony in the region, with special attention in Venezuela. However, the people reaffirmed the right to national self-determination and sovereignty. And this diplomatic struggle in Venezuela achieves a human but also forceful result. Michaelis Espinosa, this girl who managed to be recovered, rescued, and reunited with her parents by that dehumanized migratory policy that the United States implemented. She managed to return home in May of this year. Michaelis Antonella Espinosa Bernal returns puts an end to a painful family separation during an attempt to enter U.S. territory, a direct consequence of Washington migratory policies, a practice that has been denounced by human rights organizations. The Venezuelan government denounced the case as an example of treatment received by their fellow citizens and activated diplomatic mechanisms to achieve reunification. Michaelis arrived at the Maiquetía International Airport, where she was received by authorities such as the first fighter Celia Flores and Diosdado Cabello. She later met with her relatives at Miraflores Palace in the midst of an emotional scene that closes months of uncertainty and consular management. The Venezuelan chancellor assumed the defense of the case and demanded from Washington the respect for the right of children to remain with their family members, a fundamental principle violated by U.S. migratory authorities. President Nicolás Maduro thanked the cooperation of U.S. officials to achieve the return and described the event as an act of justice. I have to thank Ambassador Rich Grenell, special envoy of President Donald Trump, for his actions. And with Ambassador Rich Grenell thank President Donald Trump that this act of human justice has been consumed, deeply human. Michaelis' case became a precedent in the defense of the rights of Venezuelan migrants abroad. Caracas reiterated its commitment to protect its citizens no matter where they are. Let's take a break in Global Synthesis 2025. We'll be right back. 2025 has marked a new myth of public immigration policy of Donald Trump, generating a campaign of terror against without precedents. Washington launched the largest deportation operation in history, generating a campaign of terror against Latino migrants seeking a better life due to unilateral sanctions imposed on their countries of origin. Immigration and custom enforcement target and detain hundreds of people, citing alleged criminal records, and Trump won on the human rights of the migrants population. A large portion of the Latin American community was illegally deported from the United States to various countries, as was the case of the 238 Venezuelans who ended up being held at the Secot detention center in El Salvador, accused without evidence of belonging to new defunct strain Aragua gang. During these scenarios, it observed how Donald Trump executed hate campaigns to increase xenophobia and aggressions against migrants, directly impacting the stability of the Latin American region. The Venezuelan government also condemned the illegal detention, kidnapping, and serious human rights violation against Venezuelan citizens at the Seco terrorist detention center in El Salvador. Venezuela stood firm in denouncing the illegal detention and serious human rights violation committed against the 252 Venezuelan citizens held at the Seco terrorism detention center in El Salvador, the mega prison built by the government of Nayib Bukele. The imprisonment, which lasted for more than 4 months, was described by Caracas as a kidnapping and an act of hostility against migrants. The detention of these citizens was part of the United States government immigration policy, which deported them directly to El Salvador between March and April 2025, under the pretext that they were alleged members of the now defunct criminal group Tren de Aragua. After months of negotiation and constant complaints, the Bolivarian government secured the release and repatriation of the 252 nationals, along with other Venezuelan nationals, as part of a border prisons exchange. Since the beginning of these arbitrary detentions driven by Donald Trump's inhumane immigration policy, thousands of families have lost contact with their relatives abducted in El Salvador, and the few who have been able to communicate report receiving humane treatment. Until the blood didn't come out, they didn't let us put it on, and they were telling me to go pay the tolls. They were, here you're going to spend, they were saying to me, here you are going to die. Here you are going to spend the last 30 years of your life. You are never going to get out of here. They beat us badly until one day one of them passed out, and one of the 32 cells passed out, the Chinese. They told us they passed out. When they passed out, we all rebelled. That was the first riot when the Chinese passed out, but we only threw water. President Nicolás Maduro celebrated the repatriation of the co-nationals kidnapped by the United States. The first plane has just landed with the 252 Venezuelans rescued and released from the concentration and torture camps of Nayib Bukele in El Salvador. The Venezuelan boys who were kidnapped, disappeared, tortured, and 125 days later, we rescued them. Freedom, freedom. To complete a perfect day. Upon arriving at the international airport of Maiquetía, the repatriates were personally received by authorities and immediately subjected to a comprehensive care operation, including exhaustive medical exams and psychological support to treat trauma and physical injuries. Since the assassination of the General Moise in 2021, Haiti has been plunged into a profound structural crisis where the vacuum of power and the violence of our groups have caused unprecedented forced displacement, reaching even historical figures of people taking refuge in inhuman conditions. We're going to review how this uncontrolled violence continues to strike, especially its capital, Port-au-Prince, generating a massive exodus of citizens, transforming the security crisis into a true humanitarian disaster. In 2022, between January and July, the violence of the gangs left more than 900 deaths and 600 wounded. In the month of August, the UN registered 130,000 internally displaced people. By the end of 2023, the figures skyrocketed. The UN reported 3,960 deaths at the hand of armed groups, while displacement, alone in the metropolitan area of Port-au-Prince, rose to almost 1,407 people. In 2024, it marked a little rebound. The UN confirmed the assassination of at least 5,600 people and the kidnapping of another 1,500 events that caused a massive exodus from the capital, with more than 20,000 people displaced to various destinations. Currently, the International Organization for Migration has alerted about a record figure: more than 1 million people has forcibly displaced due to the widespread violence and political instability in the Caribbean country. But the migration crisis of the Sahrawi people is not a recent phenomenon. It is a direct but also prolonged consequence of a conflict in Western Sahara. It all started in 1975 with the so-called Green March, which consolidated the military occupation of Morocco. Details in the report. The Sahrawi people celebrate half-century of Moroccan occupation in Western Sahara, a wound that keeps thousands of people in refugee camps. More than 170,000 exiles survive in the city of Tindouf in Algeria, under the misery caused by Moroccans who militarized the territory, facing extreme conditions and an uncertain future. The main demand of the Sahrawi national movement, the Polisario Front, is to make a referendum to decide the future of the community, an unfulfilled promise that led to the break of the high fire between the Sahrawi resistance and the Moroccans, which lasted more than 3 decades. The situation worsens with the support of the Spanish government to the Moroccan autonomy plan. This position is considered a betrayal to the Sahrawi to legitimize the occupation and abandon the historical responsibility. About 3,000 Sahrawi minors arrived in Spain due to the Peace Holidays program. The young people trapped in the legal limbo forced to a circular migration between Algeria and Spain. Despite 5 decades of oblivion and difficulty, the Sahrawi people reference their right to exist. The struggle of sovereignty and the return to their land remains the only possible horizon for a nation without state. The United Nations also warned that Sudan faced the greatest crisis of displaced people in the world. Until November 2025, more than 13 million people have been forced to flee their homes due to clashes between the National Army and the Rapid Support Forces. This was highlighted by the UN Secretary General of Humanitarian Affairs, Tom Fletcher, pointing out that the situation in the country is not only critical. This was part of a meeting with the President of the Sovereign Council of Sudan, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. Millions of Sudanese also currently live in food insecurity, which already is aggravating what constitutes one of the largest humanitarian emergencies worldwide. The office has also found that hundreds of people have been killed during all these events. Here we're going to add another data, also cruel. In the last quarter of this 2025, UN Women was denounced the systematic violence that hundreds of them suffer, victims also of these acts of violence. The Regional UN Women Direction for East and Middle East Africa condemned the deliberate practice of sexual violence by the armed groups against hundreds of displaced women. It also warned about the lack of safe places where women can find protection or access to basic psychological care. The United Nations warned about the extreme levels of acute malnutrition due to the difficulties in accessing food as a consequence of the armed conflict. In addition, they claim that the crisis of infant malnutrition in Sudan reached a critical point. Humanitarian organizations say that the lack of funds and the severe restrictions on access to humanitarian aid threaten to aggravate the emergency that affects thousands of children. Sudan also an epicenter of a strong security crisis, 2 key regions, Darfur and Kordofan. The conflict transcended direct confrontation, impacting civilians through undeniable practices such as the kidnapping of relatives due to alleged ties to the army. Humanitarian organizations catalog these actions as a violation of international humanitarian law, emphasizing the lack of civil protection in the framework of the armed conflict. This is how this tour ends for this Global Synthesis 2025 special program. I'm Paula Perez, and I'm going to leave you with this video clip from Calle 13, this song called Latin America, which today more than ever becomes a hymn, a symbol of sovereign peoples of a region, so that Latin America and the Caribbean can continue to be respected as an area of peace.